Let's just start with this one quote because it really gets to the heart of everything. Bliss cannot be maintained, it's always a moment. I mean, we've all felt that, right? That perfect flash of happiness or clarity that's just gone a second later. But what if there's an entire philosophy built around managing the chaos in between those moments?
So today we're going to dive into a pretty intense and fascinating way of looking at the world, a truly radical philosophy of balance. We're going to unpack a system that sees life less as a hunt for happiness and more like a constant series of payments to, well, to cosmic forces.
So where does a philosophy like this even begin? Well, it starts inside. It starts with this idea of an internal balancing act, a constant private struggle for equilibrium that, honestly, most of us probably feel every single day, even if we don't have a name for it.
Okay, so think of this internal struggle as being between two opposing forces. On one side, you've got Yahweh. This represents order, action, that kind of angry, focused feeling. You know, the energy you get from a really tough workout. And on the other side, you've got Kali. This is chaos, desire, that sad or relaxed feeling, like when you just sink into a good book. The core idea here is you're always making payments to one side or the other just to keep your head above water.
So you might be wondering, what's the point of all this work? Why are we constantly paying these internal debts? Well, it all comes down to this: to clear the fog, to get these two warring forces out of the way just for a second, so there's enough space for a new idea, a new direction, a moment of actual inspiration to break through.
But let's be honest, that internal battle is absolutely exhausting, which leads to a really radical alternative. This concept called the transgression for light idea. And trust me, it is a totally different way of getting to that same clear space.
And that, of course, brings up the million-dollar question. What if you could just stop? Is there any way to get out of this draining internal cycle? Can you find that mental clarity without constantly tearing yourself apart to do it? This question, well, it's the launchpad for a much, much darker philosophy.
And here is the answer it proposes. It's called the Frankist idea. The belief is, to get that light, that big breakthrough idea, you have to create an overwhelming amount of darkness, not inside yourself, but out in the world. The thinking is, by transgressing, and more importantly, causing others to transgress, you create this kind of spiritual vacuum that's so intense that the light is literally forced to rush in and fill it.
So the logic kind of goes like this. First, you accept that the internal struggle is just too draining. It's a losing game. So second, you externalize the chaos. You create something, a song, a situation, a tone that causes sadness, guilt, or woe in other people. And third, that external payment of negative energy is what ends up clearing the fog for you, but without you having to pay the personal price.
So as you can imagine, this new path puts you at a pretty stark moral crossroads. It forces you to make a fundamental decision about what your role in the world is going to be. Are you the one doing things, or are you the one things are done to? This choice is summed up perfectly in this one powerful question from the source material. Are you going to be the mark or the marker? It frames the entire world as a system where you are one or the other. And in this view, there's really no in-between.
Let's break that down. The marked is the passive one, the person who just waits around to get tricked or worn down by the system. They're basically the prey. But the marker, that's a whole different story. The marker goes on the offense. They actively create the very things, the scenarios, the tones, the frequencies, that cause those negative emotions in others. It's like a preemptive strike to protect themselves by putting the mark on someone else first.
But here's the big twist. Choosing to be the marker might not be the escape you think it is. What if this whole radical path is just another piece of a much bigger, totally unescapable cycle?
Because you see, this idea is anything but new. This dynamic of the oppressor and the oppressed, the marker and the marked, you can see it pop up all throughout history. You find similar concepts in ancient Babylon, parallels in Hindu and Persian texts, historical precedents in ancient Egypt. It's a pattern that just keeps repeating. This quote from the source just says it all so perfectly. It points out how the very people who were oppressed, who hated their oppressors, they eventually turned around and adopted the exact same methods. The marked become the markers, and the whole wheel just keeps on turning. And once you see this pattern, you start seeing it everywhere, don't you? It feels like we're all caught in this massive loop, just watching the same essential story play out in our movies, hearing it in our songs, seeing it in society, just remade with a new cast over and over and over again. And all of this brings us to the climax, the heart of this entire framework.
It all boils down to one final, deeply personal question that this way of thinking forces you to confront. Faced with all this, who do you choose to be?
Because if you take the path of the marker all the way to its logical conclusion, the lines get dangerously, dangerously blurred. You can end up in a place where you actually start to find pleasure in causing pain, where creating that darkness for other people becomes its own kind of reward.
And here's why that's so seductive and so messed up. Think about how close the physical expression of extreme joy is to extreme pain. Laughter and crying, physiologically, they are almost the same release. So the theory goes, if you can weaponize laughter to cause pain in someone else, you're basically paying both Kali and Yahweh at the exact same time. It's a shortcut to a really twisted kind of transcendence.
And this is the internal crisis that happens. If you follow the right path, the moral path, but you still end up feeling crushed and wrong, you're going to start to question the rules of the game. You start asking yourself, wait a minute, what even are these morals? And where did I get them from in the first place?
So, we end right here, with the final, really provocative question that this whole philosophy leaves us wrestling with. If the line between creating joy and creating pain is that thin, if the cycle feels impossible to escape, and if the only real prize is a fleeting moment of clarity in the fog, who do you choose to be?